Hello, welcome back to your free training for Windows 7. In this video, I will look at USB and configuring USB devices using group policy. Before I have a look at how to monitor the bandwidth and power needs of USB, it pays to understand a little bit more about USB. Currently, there are 4 different standards of USB. The first widely used standard was 1.0. This did have a few problems, mostly related to using USB hubs, and was replaced by the 1.1 standard. Both standards work at a maximum speed of 12 megabits per second. This is good for mice and keyboard-like devices, but not suitable for any device that requires high speed, such as hard disks. The next standard released was USB 2.0, which addressed some of the shortcomings of USB 1. The maximum speed increased to 480 megabits, which allowed it to be used for devices such as hard disks and video cameras. Previously, USB was not fast enough for these devices. In some cases, even USB 2.0 was not fast enough, and people used another standard called FireWire to perform high-speed transfers. Having said that, USB 3.0 is now available, running up to 5 gigabits a second. Regardless of what devices you buy, you can plug in the USB device. Your computer or USB hub will work out the speed of the device and match the speed. In other words, you could plug in a USB 1.1 device into a USB 3.0 port, and the speed will automatically drop down to USB 1. When you look at the device manager, there are a lot of device drivers which make USB work. The names of the drivers may change from system to system and operating system to operating system. Open Host Controller Interface is used for USB 1. Enhanced Host Controller Interface is used for USB 2. And Extensible Host Controller Interface is used for USB 3. This is the driver that Windows uses to communicate with USB hardware in your computer. Opening Device Manager and looking for this driver is one way you can determine which standard of USB your system supports. Depending on the hardware on your computer, the name of the device driver may change. Also, if you have multiple USB controllers in your computer, you may see more than one device driver. Your system will then install a number of USB root hub drivers, one for each USB port on your computer. In this example, the first USB port is connected to a USB modem. When you look in the properties for one of the USB root hubs, you will see the modem. The second device was connected to a USB DVD drive, which will also be connected to a separate USB root hub driver. The third USB root hub driver is connected to a USB hub. The USB hub can have its own power supply, otherwise it will get its power from the computer. If you put in too many devices on the USB hub, it will draw too much power from the system. If this occurs, Windows may not be able to use some of your USB devices. Let's have a look at the Device Manager in Windows 7 and see how all the USB drivers work together. First of all, I need to open the Device Manager. To do this, open the Control Panel and go to System and Security, and then under System select Device Manager. If I now go to Universal Serial Bus Controllers, you can see there are a lot of device drivers that make USB work. You can see here the standard Open HCD USB host controller. This device is used for USB 1 devices. The driver above this, Standard Enhanced PCI to USB host controller, is used for USB 2 devices. If either of these drivers are missing, your computer does not support that standard of USB, or it is not correctly configured. On some systems, the name of these drivers may change, so don't worry too much if you can't see these drivers on your system. Also, some systems have multiple USB controllers, so you may see more than one of these device drivers. Down at the bottom, I have a USB root hub driver. Each USB port on your computer will have its own USB root hub. If I go to the properties of this driver and then select the Power tab, we can find out what sort of power needs this port has. At the top it says the hub is self-powered. In this case, it means the power is coming from the computer. Below, you can see that the power per port is 500 milliampere. This is a little misleading because, as you can see down at the bottom, there is one device plugged in and 7 free ports. The USB thumb drive plugged into the computer is using the port and 200 milliamperes of power. If I were to plug a USB hub into this port, I could run 8 ports off that hub. In simple language, it is saying this port can support 8 devices with 500 milliamperes for each device. If I go to the Advanced tab, I can see the device is running at high speed. If I plugged a USB 1 device into this port, this would cause this port to switch down to USB 1. If I go back to Device Manager, you can see another USB root hub. This is for another device plugged into the system. If you want to find which USB root hub your device is plugged into, it is a matter of trial and error for you to find the right one. On this system, I have a USB hub plugged into the computer. You can see this has appeared as generic USB hub. If I go into the properties for this device, you can see that I have a lot of the same options that I had on the other device driver. On the Power tab, you can see many USB devices are plugged into this hub. At the top, you can see that the hub is powered by the bus and that there are 100 milliamps available for this USB device. In the Attached Devices section, there are 3 devices connected to this hub. Listed also is the amount of power each device is using. If I go to the Advanced tab, I can see this hub is operating at high speed. Below this, I can see this hub has a Single Transaction Translator, or TT. When you plug a USB 1 device into a USB 2 hub, the device must change that single port from USB 1 to USB 2. The TT performs this. Without a TT, the whole hub must switch down to USB 1. This USB hub has 8 ports. Even with only one TT, I can still plug as many USB 1 devices as I like into the hub. The disadvantage of this is that all the devices must share the single TT, which can cause the performance of the hub to drop. This is only a problem if you have more than one USB 1 device plugged into this hub. A better quality hub has more TTs, and thus the workload converting from USB 1 to USB 2 is shared between them. Down at the bottom, you can again see how many devices are plugged into the USB hub. This time, however, you get an indication of how much bandwidth each USB device is using. If I now go back to Device Manager, there are still a few more USB device drivers. On this system, there are 2 composite devices and a mass storage device. These are required for the operating system to communicate with the devices. The devices you plug in will determine which additional device drivers are installed. Now that I have looked at how to install and troubleshoot device drivers, you may want to put some control on what users can do using Group Policy. If I now close the Device Manager and open Group Policy from the Start menu by typing Group and selecting Edit Local Group Policy, I can change the local group policy settings on this computer. The majority of the settings can be found in Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, System, and then Device Installation. These settings determine how device drivers will be installed on your system. There are a lot of settings you can configure. If you want to have device drivers installed with as little user interaction as possible, you may want to configure Turn Off Balloons when found new hardware. You can also configure if Windows will send error reports to Microsoft. This kind of information does help Microsoft improve their operating system, but some companies are sensitive about information that gets sent out. If I go into the folder Device Installation Restriction, I can control which device drivers are installed on the system. If you do decide to configure options in here, you may want to consider setting the first option, allow administrators to override device installation restriction policies. This will allow an administrator to log into a computer and install a device driver regardless of what the settings are set to, but will prevent the average user from doing this. There are also options to allow you to customize messages that are displayed to the end user. For example, you may want to display a message saying that driver installation blocked. Please contact your help desk. Further down, you have the option to prevent installation of devices that match any of these device IDs. If I go into this policy and enable it and press the Show button, I can enter in the hardware IDs of the devices for which I want to prevent installation. To get the device ID, I need to go back into Device Manager and find the device I want to block. In this case, I will block installation of the COM port. If I go into the properties of COM port 1 and then to the Details tab, I can select the properties for Hardware ID. You can see here that there are two values present. Some devices will have multiple values, and it is important to get the right one. For example, if I were looking at the keyboard would have an ID for the device and also one for human interface device. If I were to copy the human interface, I would block all input devices, probably not the results you want. In this case, I want to block all COM ports, so I can copy the second hardware ID. Now all I need to do is go back into Group Policy and paste the value in and close the setting. If you want to try and prevent data being moved from your network, you can also configure the option Prevent Installation of Removable Devices. This will stop the user from being able to use USB thumb drives. There are also two more settings under driver installation. Now that I have finished configuring Group Policy, if I now go back into Device Manager, you can see that nothing has changed. This is because the policy I set only comes into effect when the driver is installed. If I uninstall COM port 1 and then scan for hardware changes, you will notice that the COM port will be installed, but this time will appear under Unknown Devices. If I go into the properties for the device, you can see that there is a message saying the installation of the device has been blocked by Group Policy. That's it for USB and Group Policy with Device Manager. In the next video, I will look at application compatibility in Windows 7.